The wheel of time turns, and ages come and go, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose in the mountains of mist. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning. The Wheel of Time turns and podcasts come and go. Welcome to WOTCast, a Wheel of Time book and watch club. We are reading through Robert Jordan's epic fantasy series and watching Amazon's Wheel of Time TV show. I am Caleb Wimble, and with me, as always, are Katie Jarvis.
Hello.
Dan Katinsky.
Hey, everyone.
And Keely Frank.
Hello.
You can find us all at WOTCast.net and support the show at patreon.com/WOTCast. Your support means a lot. Even just $2 at the Two Rivers tier helps. Join us at the $5 Tarvalent tier, and you'll get access to special bonus-sodes where we talk about things like Wheel of Time short stories, graphic novels, video games, failed TV pilots, and related fantasy epics. Email us questions, comments, and corrections via contact@wotcast.net with the subject line questions. We'll answer them here on the show. For those unfamiliar, The Wheel of Time is the highest-rated Fellowship of the Ring story on fanfiction.net. So popular, it spawned 13 sequels, a prequel, and a spin-off TV series. Last time, we talked about chapters 36 to 40 of The Eye of the World, the first book in the series. Matt lay dying of doom-laden dagger disease while Rand explored the great city of Caemlyn, where he met a colorful cast of new characters. Elsewhere, Nynaeve, Lan, and Moiraine launched a daring rescue of Perrin and Egwene from the White Cloaks. We also talked about episode 5 of the Wheel of Time TV show, where some of the same things happened, except in Tar Valon instead of Caemlyn, and mostly we watched the bereaved warder step in being very, very, very sad. This episode of WOTCast, we're digging into The Eye of the World, chapters 41 to 45, where the party is finally reunited. So, Keely, what happens in chapter 41, Old Friends and New Threats?
Yeah, so Rand is talking about kind of everything that happened so far to Loial, the Ogier, and the innkeeper, Master Gil, that was friends with Tom. And then Moiraine and the others finally arrive. It's kind of like a dramatic entrance because someone comes running into the room and says that, like, there's someone here asking for the people from the Two Rivers.
Right.
And you just find out it's them. It's not like a dark friend. And Matt
For once.
Yeah, and Matt is still kind of going crazy from the dagger that he took from Shadar Logoth, and then he tries to kill Moiraine with the dagger.
Yeah, so we're getting everybody into place here. We're just getting them all back together. We're not having the sort of fragmentary thing of the TV show last week where some of the characters are reuniting and then secretly reuniting in the midst of reuniting with others, and Perrin and Egwene are doing whatever. We're getting the gang all together here. Things are moving. We're getting characterizations from everybody. We're getting... I really enjoy Loial, meeting everybody going on here. I thought this chapter read very quickly, very easily for me. I thought everything did this week. I was really into them, other than some of the hang-ups that we have mentioned in chat that I'm sure we'll get into about our ever angsty teenagers and their relationships with one another. Do we get our first Egwene being really pissy about Rand having talked to another female human being in the month and something that they were separated here? Or is that next chapter? They all kind of bleed together for me a little bit here.
I can't remember if it's right then, but at some point one of them brings up talking to Min, and then is that the first one then?
Oh, right, yeah, we got Min and Elaine, yeah.
Yeah, and then Egwene gets all weirdly jealous about it for no reason.
There's also kind of the weird, though deliberately weird in the story, dynamic of Matt seeing everybody, and instead of being like happy to see them because he is so far gone with the dagger poisoning at this point, he's mocking each of them in a really specific some aspect of their personality they don't really like, which for both of the Two Rivers women involves talking about pretty Nynaeve and pretty Egwene, and wisdom isn't supposed to think of herself as a woman, is she? Not a pretty woman, but you do, don't you? And it's just I don't know. It'd be one thing if it was just one of them, but like getting into the weirdness of both of them that way. Like it's not like he then goes and is like, handsome parent who or whatever. Because I mean, every one of these characters is described as being pretty attractive by conventional standards in their own ways. And I don't know. It's as usual. I feel like the gender politics are the strangest thing about some of these chapters now, or the most dated things in some ways sometimes.
Yeah, I wasn't a super fan of that. I enjoyed that they made Matt more paranoid, where he was like, how do I know that you are who say you are? Like, just making him thinking that, like, these people could be anyone. But then also making him kind of slowly go down the road of, like, a sexual predator was really uncomfortable for me, where he was just calling them out on pretty, because that reminded me of, was it when they're preparing for, was it Beltane? I can't remember if it's like Tom or Padden Fane at that point is talking to them and asks either Nynaeve or Egwene about like, oh, the prettiest girl in the group, you should be with me. And it's like, it just like brought back that creepy moment. And I was like, can we not do that?
I think that was Tom actually, yeah, because he wanted an assistant for his act.
Yeah, I felt similarly, and I was sort of reflecting because I have a character in the book I'm writing that is sort of possessed, and I'm constantly like failing at conveying that he is possessed. So I think it's like a tricky thing to do, and you have to like just come up with these, like, how do we convey that Matt is so far gone? Well, like by making him really sexist, of course. But I also was wondering what you all thought of Moiraine like being able to kind of lift his possession so easily. Like, I know it wasn't supposed to be easy, but it did seem like he was really, really bad, and then pretty quickly he was back to regular old Matt again. And I'm not sure if it might be in the next chapter that happens. But I don't know. It seemed a little bit easy to me. Did anyone else feel that way?
Definitely felt like it was easy, but I did like the way it was described. Like the whole, like, pulling the knife out. Like, I love the confidence of Moiraine, and just like the knife's like right at her throat, and she's just casually talking.
That's such a good moment.
It struck me as like a very strong visual moment with like a lot of tension there, and the way like Lan, it was like a good way of just kind of showcasing the connection and kind of the bond that like Lan and Moiraine have. And I really like, I had this really cool cinematic image in my head with like kind of the shot, like the angles you could do there with like that shot, and just her confidence of just like staring at Matt and like trying to analyzing the situation while not being intimidated by the fact there's like a knife at her throat. Could have been a very tense moment done well. And I don't think we're going to get in the TV show, which is a bummer.
No? Really? You don't think that'll be... I was assuming next episode, actually, that Moiraine would meet
maybe. I don't know. At this point, I've given up on a lot of the cool moments from the book because they just gloss over. I mean, we can get into that when we start talking about the or I guess you guys already talked about last episode, but I just feel like there's a lot of cool moments that are just not going to happen in the TV show. Everything just feels so rushed. So, I don't know. We get what we get with the show, but they don't slow down at all to like kind of soak in any moments.
Unless it's about Steppen, then we'll slow down plenty to just spend a lot of time on that subplot. I should stop ragging on him. He's a good character and a good performance. I just like, I still am resenting how much of season 1 wound up being dedicated to a character who doesn't matter to the plot.
That was shocking. I did just catch up on that episode last night and was surprised by how, like, for trying to go as fast as they are, they're just like building in huge plot lines that haven't even existed in the book yet, if ever. So it is what it is. But yeah, so I agree with you, Katie. I think it was like kind of quick. Like a lot of things Moiraine seems to solve pretty fast. It's definitely kind of a running theme at this point. That's like, as soon as Moraine's involved, she says it's going to be tricky, and then she solves it right away. But it's still cinematic the way they conducted it.
And she doesn't quite solve it, right? I actually did like all the stuff about how she's really only doing this is a temporary patch, and she can't separate him from the dagger. We find out that this was one of my favorite descriptions, I think, and of the way that and this is clearly what I was thinking back to, I think, with Shadar Logoth, and importing some of this memory of the way that its magic works like a cancer in the city, and the seed of it is growing in Matt, rather, the seed of Mashadar, and this paranoia, this evil that is going to spread like a plague wherever he goes. Just as one scratch from that blade is enough to infect and destroy, she says. So soon, a few minutes with Matt will be just as deadly. And she amps it up to like existential stakes. She's like, yeah, if we can't solve this, if we can't get him to Tar Valon to fully separate him from the dagger somehow and get this corruption out of him, it may spread to the entire world and doom all of humanity in the way that it did Shadar Logoth, which sort of adds this whole new existential threat plotline that I think we've found is kind of different from the Dark One and separate from him, because the Dark One's own creatures really fear Shadar Logoth, and it's like a different kind of evil that grew there. And it's a very maybe human sort of evil that could consume everything.
I did think that was interesting and a little unexpected, because it sets up like basically all the chapters that we read this week, that the goal is solving that issue rather than some of the other issues. And they're not even headed necessarily to Tar Valon anymore, which is interesting. So I was like, oh, okay, we have a new problem.
Well, I have a question about the dagger. So I think they say that like the dagger can be sent by the Dark Friends. So is that supposed to indicate like why they were being chased so heavily at different points was because they could tell that he had it?
Yep, it seems like we're being finally given a stronger, clear explanation for why seemingly every Dark Friend in Andor and the Fade kept. She says, "It's a wonder you got this far carrying this. I felt the evil of it when I laid eyes on him, the touch of Mashadar, but a Fade could sense it for miles. Even though he would not know exactly where, he would know it was near, and Mashadar would draw his spirit while his bones remembered that this same evil swallowed an army, dreadlords, Fades, trollocs, and all. And even some Dark Friends could feel it, apparently, she says. Those who've truly given away their souls to the Dark One, it would have drawn them to seek it like a magnet draws iron filings." And then that's where Rand relates that they were attacked by Dark Friends repeatedly the whole way.
So she walks into the room and she's like, oh shit, like I can tell that something's fucked up with Matt. He's got this thing. Are we supposed to just assume that we had to wait for the dagger to like seep into Matt for that to be a thing? Or were we supposed to think that like Moiraine would have been able to sense it from the beginning? Because
she didn't sense it from the beginning, right? She even says, she's like, why didn't you tell me? I told you not to take anything from Mordath.
Well, that's just what I was thinking. Like, if it's supposed to be that, like, you know, it was so obvious to her, but only once it had an impact on Matt, then I was like, okay, that makes sense, because they did have an interaction right on the edge of Shadar Logoth, not necessarily next to each other, but when, like, the black mist or whatever was separating them, and she was like, oh shit, you guys are fine, like, you go that way, we'll go this way. And he had it on him, presumably, at that point. So that's why I was like, should she not have known from right there, or did she have to wait for it to, like, warm up a bit?
Well, they were in the city, so I assume that, like, the city was, like, all around her, so it's kind of like the stench separated. So if you're like in sewage, you're not gonna be able to like point out specific sewage, whereas if you have a trash can somewhere else, like she could probably smell it like right away. So it's like probably couldn't sense it with everything else around them, and they're kind of in the city still. So, and they have like the fog and everything kind of chasing after them, so there's probably other distractions as well.
I think that's right, and I think it's also what you said, Keely, that it's growing in him. I get the sense that it is like that Mashadar is kind of coming to taking him over in a way, and that he's barely resisting it at this point, and he's near. And so I think it did grow within him and spread, and that made it much more detectable also, in addition to what you're saying, Dan, that, yeah, they were surrounded by it there, so she didn't really have a way of knowing.
Back to, like, Katie's point, though, it does seem like this is a pretty convenient Band-Aid. Like, they haven't cured it, and it's going to become a plot line later on. They're going to develop that more where she can't fully get rid of it. But it's like she put a strong enough Band-Aid on it where for the next few chapters doesn't really seem to be an issue at all, and he seems to be back to his normal self for temporarily.
I was gonna say I felt like there's a beat missing where Rand should have been like kind of embarrassed that he let Matt go this far. I don't know, like I was like, I'm embarrassed for you, Rand. Like, you should have realized how serious this was, and you didn't really take it that seriously. But maybe he just knew there was nothing he could do, so.
Right, Nynaeve comes in and sees Matt, and he's, like, burning up with this fever and everything, and she like, turns to Rand and is like, he's not sick, you say, or something to that effect.
I have, like, a list of just, like, notes about, like, Rand being stupid and, like, these 5 chapters. Just, like, and Rand's a dumbass here and dumbass here. It's like, he's extremely hard to get behind as a protagonist because he's so unobservant and dumb and just says the stupidest shit and doesn't pick up on any subtlety at all.
Well, and oh my god, I just blanked. The hell is... it's hard watching the show and then coming back to it because so much of what we are like, just fucking talk to each other, they're doing in the show, but they're not doing here. And so I'm like, Matt's literally dead. Like, he's about to be fucking dead. And you're like, nah, it's good. I don't want to tell anyone. I don't want to bother anyone. Like, bro, fuck it. Like, fuck off with that. Just tell everyone everything. I'm so tired of this.
Yeah, they start talking so quickly in the show. Like, they tell the dreams, like, the moment it happens, she's like, oh, you guys are having dreams. And in the book, it's like, we're going to wait till near the end of the book to, like, fill you in on this, Moiraine. Like, we don't trust you and everything, so we're just going to... They keep hindering themselves. Like, I don't understand the rationale to kind of keep going with Moiraine and keep on this quest, but then constantly, like, refraining from, like, informing her of stuff when it's like, either don't go on this quest and don't follow her and give her information, or just, like, dump everything on her so she's aware of it, because she seems to be the best at kind of guiding through this.
Well, they're doing it now, right?
Like, decent job so far.
It feels like they've learned their lesson at this point, or am I giving them too much credit?
Took them long enough. Took them like 600 pages.
And you could feel her exasperation and finding out about the dreams and everything at this point, how far they went. And even the show, right? They reveal the first dreams, but then as they get worse, they're like, maybe we shouldn't tell her about this part or something, even without Tom being there to warn them not to trust Aes Sedai. I don't know if it's, maybe I'm again skipping and conflating these chapters, but Tom is brought up and Moiraine doesn't believe he's dead either. If everybody's kind of reaching consensus that, no, he's definitely not. And we would have heard in Whitebridge, that would have been a big enough deal of a Gleeman dying there. So he might have disappeared, but he's still going to come back at some point. Although it doesn't seem like there's a lot of time for him to, especially as we get into what happens near the end of these chapters. So maybe that is a sequel hook. Like, I'm kind of thinking maybe the dagger is also a sequel hook at this point and this other existential threat, because I truly don't remember if there's even time left in the last 8 chapters of this novel for Matt to get reinfected or for that to start spreading again, or if that is being just like conveniently band-aided by Moiraine here, because don't worry, that'll be the plot of another book or something at this point. Because I'm kind of wondering, with how few pages actually remain in this novel, whether we're going to get resolution of that plot line or Tom showing back again. But we're reaching the point where I'm like, wow, I really don't remember. It's such a blur getting to the grand finale, which I remember very distinctly, that I don't quite remember what happens in the last few chapters here versus what happens in The Great Hunt. I'm sure the show is partly to blame for that. Oh, little detail here. Did we know that Egwene doesn't get sick? And she sort of mentions, that's a line, when she's asking what's wrong with Matt, she's like, is it catching? I can still treat him. I don't seem to catch sick no matter what it is. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Is that a one power thing in particular? Do we know that Aes Sedai don't just get sick as a rule because they have the one power? Or is this an Egwene specialty here? Like yet another ability of these Ta'veren manifesting itself?
Is it Egwene or is it Nynaeve? I have Nynaeve. Did I write down the wrong name?
No, you're right. It's because my book conflates them in the same paragraph. You're totally right. It's like, what's wrong with him? Okay. Egwene asked, and Nynaeve added, is it catching? I can still treat him. I don't seem to catch sick no matter what it is. Okay. It's like one together line. You're right. Did we know that about Nynaeve in that case? Or is this related to her special healing abilities?
Not that I know of, because I literally wrote down Nynaeve never gets sick. Is that an Aes Sedai thing?
Okay.
that was new to me, so I assume that's what that was.
And I'm now that we're watching the show, I'm constantly getting confused by, like, because the show's inventing some new things for Aes Sedai and like new mechanics and changing some of the old ones. So I'm getting very confused about like what's a show mechanic and what's like the book mechanic. Because they'll say something and then the show handles it differently or gives power or kind of shifts power. And I'm like, I'm definitely, it's starting to become a blur watching and reading at the same time. Yeah,
something related to that actually that we didn't seize on last week. I don't think we mentioned, Katie and Keely, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a moment in that scene with Alana in the bedroom with Moiraine where they're lounging on the bed, where Alana's snacking on the bed, and Moiraine is wearing her boots on the bed for some reason, as we discussed, where Alana asks Moiraine if she is interested in making a play against the Amerlin seat, against Swan Sanche, which is... Okay, on one level, it's like, oh, you know, that she says it, and Moiraine kind of makes clear that she has no designs on the Amerlin seat. She's not interested in White Tower politics and power at all. And Alana sort of replies, oh, well, you know, nobody really knows what your plans are or what you're interested in, Moiraine. You keep it so close to the chest. But, you know, you're probably one of the only ones powerful enough to challenge her. And I was like, what? Okay, one, I don't know. I feel maybe this is importing too much book two knowledge, but to me, there's never any indication that Moiraine is like exceptionally powerful in the one power for an Aes Sedai, and her specialness, her abilities, to me have always come from her mind and from her connections and her wisdom, her secret knowledge, her general ability to be on top of so many things, her strength of personality and force of will. I don't think there's ever been any indication that, you know, she's skilled in the one power and she's good at certain things in the one power, but she's the first to admit she has like all these limitations, and I don't think that there's ever, and two, just like the notion that being the Amyrlin seed or becoming it is just about raw strength of one power. I don't know. Am I reading too much into that? Does she mean in the abstract, oh, you know, you're powerful in that you could command respect of other Aes Sedai? Or am I just confusing it with how much people have been talking about strength in the one power? And that was something we talked about last week. All these Aes Sedai in the room and being like, oh, well, she's way more, you know, Egwene, like you were saying, Keely, Egwene is way more powerful than any of you, and Nynaeve is twice as powerful as that. And the rudeness you were pointing out of this constant relative strength discussion to seemingly subtly put down the other Aes Sedai.
Yeah, I don't think we brought it up that, I mean, I remember you talking about the shoes on the bed. Mm-hmm. I remember that distinctly. But I don't think we talked about specifically that conversation. I don't know why I have this notion in my head that Moiraine is like pretty powerful. It could just be because she kind of gives off that impression with the scenes that she has. Mm-hmm. Where, you know, like she makes her body seem massive, or she shows up and throws fucking lightning bolts at people. So I don't know that they've necessarily explicitly said that she's supposed to be really powerful, but it's from her scenes. And then the way that she knows things makes me think that she has something like over top of the other Aes Sedai. But I kind of, now that you've said it, I kind of wonder if Alana was meaning it not so much as like, you know, raw power as much as your ability to command people or get people to listen to you. So I feel like it's probably maybe a mixture of both.
That makes sense. I was probably just getting too fixated on how much they have been talking about relative one power stuff.
Well, it's also confusing because I feel like maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I thought in the books the power dynamic is swapped where Egwene is the more powerful channeler and Nynaeve, they just like mention it like that she could become a powerful channeler.
No.
But in the book, she hasn't done anything though yet.
She hasn't done anything but heal, but Moiraine did say explicitly that she has probably twice the potential of Egwene even. And Egwene had the most potential since before the Trolloc Wars, like since 800 years ago or longer, maybe since well beyond current recording.
No, but they almost made it sound like it was like a guess because she hasn't really done anything yet to prove that. Whereas the show, they gave her that huge moment. Yeah. I kind of sympathize for her because I feel like both in the book and in the show, Egwene is set up as like kind of the main heroine or like the one they're going to focus on more, and then she gets sidelined pretty hard and hasn't really gotten like she starts learning the one power and starts to channel a little bit, and then especially in the book, she's pushed aside and given very little to do in like the last 10 chapters.
Yeah, especially in these chapters.
Yeah, I feel like in the show, I do feel like she gets a bit more of a powerful role, and I get to know her a bit better beyond being someone that is perhaps unreasonably annoyed with Moiraine all the time. So yeah, I do feel like in the book, she's kind of like pushed down a little bit too much.
Just to mention one last thing about this chapter, or maybe two things. I noted there, I thought it was a particularly terrifying line that we've had hinted at, or actually Balsamon has said this, but Moiraine kind of confirms after Perrin, who's, at some point we'll have to talk about how maybe Perrin's main role in this book, but especially in the show, is to just be traumatized all the time. And I'm wondering if Perrin has had much to do except be traumatized by things constantly. But at this point in the book here, Perrin is like, better we were all dead. He's like really leaning into how forlorn he is about everything happening and about the changes to him. And he says, better to, everywhere we go, we bring pain and suffering on our backs. It'd be better for everyone if we were dead. And Moiraine kind of just lays out, what do you think that's going to gain? Just so you know, if the Lord of the Grave has gained as much freedom to touch the pattern as I fear, he can reach you dead more easily than alive now. Dead, you can help no one, not the people who have helped you. So she's confirming what Balsamon has claimed in the dreams, that he is he has control over the grave. And if these Ta'veren won't surrender to him and join him, it's, he can work with them being dead, and then he'll just use them in other ways. Because at that point, they're completely in his control, and he can do whatever he wants with them, which is terrifying. I think the notion that this world is setting up, that there is no longer any escape, and that here, there's no sense of there being, we know that there's no afterlife, and the idea that the Dark One can just rip you out of the pattern so that you're not going to be able to be reincarnated, and he can do what he likes with your soul at that point, maybe makes these cosmic stakes a bit more horrifying and personal in that way. I thought getting that confirmation from her.
Yeah, I thought that created an interesting dynamic where now, to your point, they can't just like sacrifice themselves for the good of the team. So they don't even have that option. So it's like they had to be more technical and kind of fit into this kind of tight situation. But I don't feel like the show has had like that creates stakes for the book, and the book has been more explicit about things following them and kind of like the stakes of like the Dark One and the dreams. But back to the show, I don't think they've really set up like I feel like this side arc they've done with Logain and kind of the Aes Sedai and the White Tower have like completely negated having any kind of stakes or things following them. Whereas the books, the dreams are constant. They're having conversations with him. Yep. And in the show, he's just this like fiery, like CG Dark Lord who doesn't say anything or do anything. And it's like really cheesy. And it's like there's no development of this dialogue between him and the protagonist. So
no personality to him at all.
Yeah. Yeah, the book gets a +1 here because I feel like they're doing a much better job of actually having some stakes. They're slow, but at least there's like something driving the book forward.
Katie, didn't you bring that up last discussion on how the dreams have just kind of fallen behind the wayside as an escalating threat to the characters?
I think Keely did, yeah. But I think we did talk about that a little bit, yeah. And there's so much depth to the dreams in the book, and the fact that they're all kind of having the same ones at the same time, which makes it even more of a magnitude.
Yeah, and I just had like a couple comments. One, Dan, your hoodie is immaculate. It's a gritty hoodie, which is Philly's official mascot. But I love the idea that Balzamon has so many ridiculous nicknames. But the like, what is it, the Lord of Death or something like that is fucking
Lord
sick.
of the Grave.
Yeah, that's so cool. Going back to your point about like Perrin though, I feel like him being placed with the Tuathan, or however you say it, was such a bad idea because they read to me as very passively suicidal all the time, where they're like, well, if we're gonna get fucking murdered, fuck it. Like, you know, they're not gonna defend themselves. They're not gonna do anything. If they get attacked, they don't care because, you know, the whole cycle and all of that. But it's like, ooh, like he's going through some hardcore shit. I don't think this would be like therapist recommended to go hang out with these like very passively, like if it's the end, it's the end.
But the Tuathan don't deal with the fact that there could be some kind of corruption after death, like that Moiraine is talking about. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't think they like the Dark One is kind of. I mean, the philosophy I don't think extends to kind of this like dark power and his influence. But I don't know. I didn't see them as like suicidal or kind of leaning into that. I saw it more as this like beautiful idea of like violence always breeds violence and death is part of this cycle. So it's like they don't view death as this like intimidating like end of life, whereas more like I like the energy. Like I've always liked their philosophy because I was like that's really smart though. It's just like you become energy and you feed it and you're born into this cycle. So they kind of respect that, and eventually, and I think they expand upon it in the show or at least draw it out over a few episodes. It's this like idea that's interesting to Perrin because he's kind of less like inclined towards violence, so it's like very tempting to him. But this idea of just like not feeding into violence and chaos and being one as a people, so I saw that as more beautiful, as it's like they're not suicidal or looking for death, but at the same time they're not trying to breed death themselves, because they specifically say like in the book and in the TV show that like fighting and kind of continuing like feeding into it, even if it's for your own protection, keeps violence going. So that like the best way to kind of prevent this, according to their philosophy, is just to not engage with that at all. And if that means they die and kind of go back into the cycle, that's like the best solution they see.
Well, I mean, call me out.
No, like totally respect that though, because I can see how that like almost seems like a hippie camp where it's like they sit around kind of just like looking for death, or they're so passive towards it. But I don't know. I would just gotta push back from what from like the perspective I saw of just like it plays with Perrin's dynamic really well, and especially since he killed his wife and recognizing the consequences violence have. They're trying to build Perrin more, whereas in the book I'm like, why are you always so whiny? Like he gets wolf powers. He's communicating with wolves. He hates wolves, and he's like, I want nothing to do with them. I hate them. He's like, he has this awesome ability. He doesn't have it so bad until the White Cloaks actually capture him, and I'm just like,
right. He has been tortured in both, I guess. It's hard not to forget.
Now he has, but prior to the torturing, he hasn't really, compared to some of the other characters, he hasn't really had any focus or anything really negative happen to him. Aside some hardships on the road and like camping, he's actually had it probably the best out of all and has been pushed this, like, even though he's having the bad dreams and everything, the Dark One doesn't seem to be focusing on him as much. And he has the protection of these wolves and this communication ability, but like every time something comes up, he's just like, I hate it, like I hate life and everything. Whereas like in the show, he has more agency because he's like, he feels guilty for murdering his wife and everything, and he's like questioning that, and like
I agree, it makes him more interesting. I don't know that he has more agency though. Like what decisions is he making in the show that he's not making in the book, or like how is he expressing that he's come anywhere as a result of that trauma?
He's not there yet though, because they hit the turning point in this last episode. So developing his character arc is very like, he has, like in the books, he's just whiny, he's like upset, he's good with women, or like talking to them at least, and that's his like defining character.
Not according
trait.
to him, but yeah.
Yeah, like that's all that you know about Perrin, is that the others think he's like good at talking to women, and then he gets like the wolf powers and everything, but the entire time his character goes nowhere. He hates the journey, he hates it, he wants to go back to the field. He's guilty, he murders his wife, he's very guilty about that, he's following along because he doesn't want to stay in the village and cause everyone else to die. So he begrudgingly follows along even though his wife just died, so he's kind of processing all of this. They get to the nomadic tribe, I'm spacing on the name right now of them, but like, and then he's starting to question this, like the philosophy of like violence and kind of like how that cycle works. So he's getting these ideas fed and like talking to like the mother of the tribe, and then like the wolves happen and all that, and it's more of a subtle connection, but then he's offering to kind of sacrifice himself so Egwene can escape, and like her friendship and everything, she's telling him to fight and it's not his fault. So now he's processing that it maybe he doesn't need to hold this guilt. So now they're at a turning point where he can develop, whether or not they kind of follow through with that and actually have his character rise from this and actually have a point for living, or kind of like, I feel like Egwene and him actually have a dynamic where she's kind of building on that. He confessed to her, she's the first person he told that he killed his wife, and she's like, it's not your fault, you can rise from this or whatever, I don't want you dying here. And they have like this nice relationship where they're both trying to sacrifice themselves for the other because they care that much about each other as friends. Whereas like that whole dynamic in the White Cloak scene has none of that tension between the two, like kind of feeding. Egwene's kind of just pushed to the side in that conflict, and she's not really given a lot of agency.
That's true, because in the book it's not even her life that's in danger, because the commander it fully intends to let her go in Caemlyn once they get here, because she's not, there's no evidence. I mean, this was something we complained about in the show plotting for why Child Valda is spotting them out of nowhere, and immediately there's a chase sequence, even though there wasn't really any setup for that. I think it's interesting that you're both taking such a different perspective on the Tuatha Ond representation, because one thing I brought up from my memory of them when we first got to the Tuatha Ond is that tension I feel where I love what the Tinkers represent. I love almost all the Tinker scenes in the book and in the show. And I love that philosophy, and I love how it's expressed. And I think Marie Kennedy Doyle does an amazing job with Ela, bringing that to life and talking about how she's making she wants to make the world a better place for her daughter when her daughter is eventually born back into the pattern. And I thought that was just really lovely. But I think the very first thing I brought up when we got to the Tinker chapters was, I feel like Jordan has stacked the decks against them and their philosophy of nonviolence by placing them in a world that we know is just crawling with monsters and this like new wave of complete evil, just total unadulterated inhuman evil rolling down like a force of nature, which I think changes the calculus against like the idea of nonviolence in the real world. And I think maybe even here, like you were hinting at, breaks even further by introducing, well, now the Dark One is kind of even gaining the power to break the cycle and wants to destroy the pattern and stop you from being able to be reborn. So much for the way of the leaf. If nobody uses violence to stop the Dark One, then we're all screwed, including the Tuatha Ond, the way that things are going here, or the way that it looks like it's setting up. So I feel where you're both coming from on that, and I think it's all related to this tension, or at least, I don't know, maybe I'm just tying it into my conflicted feelings. That feels to me where it's coming from, that there's a conflict between the purpose the Tuatha Ond have to serve narratively versus the purpose they have to serve plot-wise, maybe, if that's a meaningful distinction there. It's something I grapple with.
It's a great point. I think the difference is the show hasn't focused as much on the CG dark monsters as it has the conflicts between humans. So the book is very much on the fantastical, whereas the show, the White Cloaks, are much more evil and sinister and kind of present in a lot of the episodes. And also the Dark Friends are humans. And we've kind of stopped seeing trollocs after like the third episode. So they don't seem as interested. I don't know if it's budgetary constraints or a difference of like wanting like the Game of Thrones conflict between humans more so than like the White Walkers kind of situation. I don't know if it could be budgetary reasons, but the plot is kind of gearing towards, and to your point about like the Aes Sedai and the throne and everything, they're setting up like very Game of Thrones politics, which are nowhere to be found so far in book 1. So it's like I think they're leaning more
maybe a little
conflict,
bit in Morghase's court, I think, is maybe the only glimpse we've gotten of that. But yeah,
a little bit, yeah. But even that's more towards the politics of like the realm and like the queen politics, which they haven't even shown in the show at all. But like queens and like the citizens more so than the Aes Sedai politics, which are heavily represented in the show and aren't really found very much in the book.
Yeah, we don't even meet. We don't even get Moiraine meeting with another Aes Sedai here, because she's like, there's like 20-something red Aja in the city. I have no interest in bunking with them or getting caught up in their bullshit right now. I'm going to stay here at this inn. Sorry, innkeeper. Master Gil is clearly not comfortable with it, but she's just kind of like, no, that's all right. I think this is a fine establishment. Definitely befitting. And in chapter 42, Remembrance of Dreams, I think we already covered a lot of this. This is where she actually does the healing of Mat with the Angreal and everybody's catching up. The main thing that I guess we haven't talked about is all this Loial conversation here. And we're getting recaps from everybody. And then at the end of this chapter is where Moiraine asks Loial if we can get to Fal Dara using the ways. And we're learning so much here, including that there is an Ogier run Age of Legends mail channeler created network of fast travel routes throughout the world. This kind of fantastical series of roads between realities, maybe that where time flows differently. And Loial, the moment Moiraine brings this up, is like, no, this is a terrible idea. This is the worst idea under no circumstances. That place is fucked, right? Like, fucked beyond all unfucking right now. Extreme Aragorn or Boromir trying to convince Gandalf to go down under Moria vibes here of the need to get there quickly to where we're going. Do we need to get to Mat comes down, he's being himself again, which I thought was really fun. Like, immediately you can just see the light switch change in personality, and he's maybe the only one who's not getting wrapped up in the angsty teenage bullshit here. For once, it's like Mat is just such a night and day, like, cheery and kind of quippy, sarcastic presence again as he comes down. And this is where we get all that dagger info. I have so many passages highlighted that is just too many things to go into in terms of details. We already talked a little bit about so many of Egwene's comments here. I have marked with like a sound on where the things are going between the teenagers here. And I do have to remind myself that they're just teenagers in this one. Loial talking about how the trees won't listen to very many anymore, and not many Ogier even learn the songs. So many world building details that I feel like it's hard to get into. Most of them. Anything stand out in particular here that people really wanted to get to in this chapter?
Well, there's something from the previous chapter that I wanted to see if anyone caught, and that's that they say that Logain is going to travel to Tar Valon in the same procession as Elaine and Gawain.
Yep.
Gawain, whatever. I was like, fucking why? Like, that seems like one of those plot devices that it's like, oh, well, they're all heading that way. Let's just move it in. Like, how convenient that we're going to make, potential Dragon Reborn go with the fucking daughter heir and all of that. Like, that, I just immediately was like, fuck it. Stop doing stupid shit. But I have a question. About Loial. So he's supposed to be like very wisdomous and like, knows all the things. Does he know what Perrin is? Because they point out like Rand has like 16 moments where he's like, Perrin's eyes look so fucking familiar. What am I seeing? And so it's like, wouldn't Loial, of everything that he picks up on, wouldn't he know that there are those people that can connect with wolves? I just feel like that was kind of like glazed over. He knows fucking everything else. He knows that they're the Taverine, or however you say it, Tavern, but no mention of like seeing this dude with yellow eyes and being like, hey.
I wonder, yeah, you're right. That does seem like if anybody would know, he would know. Although we do know that Lan knew because he knew Elias. I wonder if there's just so many things going on now that was like even low on the list of things to get to for him, or if it was low on the list of things for Jordan, and or maybe Jordan forgot or didn't think to have that particular interaction in writing this, because I can totally see that as a writer, the number of plot threads coming to a head in this passage, it may be exactly what you're saying, that he totally just forgot. Oh yeah, that would be a good scene to write. I should have Loial make some offhanded comment, even just like that he notices it somewhere, because I don't think he did. I certainly don't remember any mention of him noticing it here. Though we do get into other things people are noticing around the dreams, and we're talking about dreamwalkers. Moiraine saying there has not been a dreamwalker in Tar Valon for nearly 1,000 years, but I could have tried if I had known that you were all having this problem, and that she can shield them all from the dreams by staying close to her, which turns out not true. We find immediately the following night, I think, that Moraine's presence is not enough to stop. Oh, right, because we learn here there is a whole army of Fades and Trollocs practically camped outside of Caemlyn right now, that have been amassing over these past few weeks in the hunting down of all of them. And we've really got to move, because there is about to be another Trolloc war starting in this city. If we don't get you out of here, you're the bait. We need to get you out of this trap, or a lot of people are going to die, and a lot of things are going to go down very quickly.
I wanted to talk about the ways a little bit, but at first I was like, basically in all of these chapters, I feel like there was a lot of new information presented to us. Some of it done like a bit too like expository monologue-y. And at first I was like, oh, the ways sure seem to be a convenient thing to pop up right now. But I did really like the tie-in when Moiraine realizes, oh, that's how the Trollocs perhaps have been traveling, and like we haven't been able to figure it out. But I actually wish that like that had been pushed a little bit in an earlier part of the book, so that we were more like inquisitive, and like the whole crew was kind of more inquisitive to like, how are the Trollocs doing this? This is weird. What's going on? So that then when we find out about the ways, it's kind of like a big reveal, and we're like, aha, that's how they've been doing it. But I didn't feel like that was just like there enough. So it's almost like Jordan almost threaded it, but just didn't quite thread it.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And also the dagger, like I think we expressed this, and Caleb had given us the heads up that he's like, oh, we'll be answered eventually. But we were just like, okay, why do they all know where Matt and like Rand are every time? It's just like they had all these things building up, but they don't question enough. To your point, Katie, I think that would have helped. Even if he wanted to keep the reveal where it is, and I agree it should have been a little earlier, he could have been having those questions asked more frequently, as like, okay, the author is going to answer this eventually, or we'll find there'll be reveals. But like,
it was like once or twice.
They get paranoid, but they don't question it. Yeah, for either of them, they don't question enough why they're always being tracked so closely. They don't question, like, if stuff just seems to happen, and you're supposed to at the time you're supposed to accept it as a reader, and that's frustrating. It's like, okay, well, like, why? How do they keep getting tracked down so quickly by these Trollocs? Like, they're not. Moiraine's not questioning it enough. Like, they do bring it up like once or twice, but I don't know. I feel like they could have made that more of a pressing point of topic, and then this would have been earlier. Because right now it's like, we need to go really far. Okay, let's just teleport there, and oh look, we have an Ogier with us who can kind of guide the ways. It all just lines up too perfectly, and it's always the pattern that does it. So like any coincidence, like writing like author coincidence, can just be the pattern wills it. Like, as the wheel wills, it's like, okay, thank you. Like the wheel's just doing everything then. So I don't know. You can take a back seat to everything if it's just going to be the wheel doing stuff. So that gets a little old. Like I like it sometimes, and it's an interesting idea between letting events happen and kind of accepting them. But at some point when you use that plot device and mechanic so much, it's just like, okay, well, we're going to just grab some popcorn and take a back seat, because you don't have to do anything. The wheel's just going to like orchestrate it all for you.
Well, and I even wrote down in my notes for this chapter, like, okay, they've unlocked fast travel. Like they finally got to that part of the game where you've unlocked fast travel, and now you don't have to ride your fucking horse, across the map. I mean, like, now that you're saying that, I can think back to sometimes, but I don't know if it happened in the show or in the book, where I think Matt at one point is like, how do they always know where we are? And then it's
both, I think, well, but not enough, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, and then it's like, okay, well, we're going to die, so we just have to ignore that, act like everything's fine, and keep going. But something that happens, again, with Matt is like, Moiraine said, okay, I put a Band-Aid on him, but I got to get him to Tar Valon. And then at the end of this chapter, they're like, nope, we're not fucking going there. We're going to go somewhere else. And I was like, so Matt's going to die? Like, well, what are you doing? You just said that in order to fix it, you have to go to this big place and then now you're not going. So I don't know what they're going to do with that, if it's just setting it up for it to be like, oh, well, we had to do something else because the pathways within the way, like the way gates, once we got in, it was all fucked. Like, I don't know what they're doing, but I wrote at the beginning, first note for this chapter, Moiraine healed Matt temporarily, but he still has the dagger and they need to go to Tar Valon. Last note, what about healing Matt? She said they needed Tar Valon, but now there's no time.
That does make me wonder, and maybe this is something the show is kind of trying to fix by all the great hunt things that they're weaving in. It does feel like that whole plot line is almost being like, yeah, shunted off to a sequel. You can almost see like Jordan maybe wrote all of that into an earlier draft and like, okay, this book is already too long. You cannot have this whole Tar Valon diversion to deal with this whole dagger plot line. So that's going to be book 2. Whereas maybe the show writers and runner are like, yeah, maybe we can weave it all in along the way, along the same plot line, and just move the Caemlyn stuff. I think there have been we pointed out a lot of problems with this, with shunting the Caemlyn stuff over to Tar Valon, and a lot of plot threads that are getting kind of frayed at this point in the show. But maybe they're also going to fix some things or weave these things together more nicely, which we'll find out as of the time we're recording this tomorrow. We'll see the next episode. We have to say, of all the expository lore revelations here, we sort of get told finally what the Eye of the World is. Sort of. We find out that it is an enormous reservoir of power of some sort that if the Dark One gets hold of, and he's very close to getting to being enough out of his prison to touch the Eye of the World and to use it, that he will be able to use that to fully break free and be unstoppable. So obviously, the Green Man must know of this threat. We got to tell the Green Man, just suddenly thrown in here. Very, very interesting way of presenting this character I think he's been mentioned a couple times as part of the background lore, but never with any present importance. And in real life, the Green Man is a very, very ancient pagan symbol and sort of pan-cultural, not just European, but Middle Eastern and Indian, and, like even like Nepalese, Borneo, like this figure that goes back in so many cultures in the real world for thousands of years of this legendary symbol of rebirth and the cycle of life, as a kind of like nature god sort of being, who apparently here guards the Eye of the World or something.
Yeah, I did not like this like exposition dump of a chapter. This and like 43 and 44 were just like, this should have been weaved into the story narrative better. It felt like a third act. Like you see this with a lot of films where it's like they got to wrap up, or like the actual agency has to happen then. So it's like they had a dragging middle act, and now it's like, well, this is happening, so we've got to. It's like, why did Moiraine not realize this power source? Like, if it's such a big power source and it could have been like such a temptation for the Dark One to kind of reach, or like an easy grab, it's like, why is this so? I still don't understand why this is like a revelation for Moiraine. It's like, well, we got this power source up there. It's like, why wouldn't he go after that? It just seems like obvious. And like now their rationale to have to go protect it when I thought she was taken care of. Like I feel like this book has just kind of meandered along different plot lines. It's not sticking to one. So it's like, it's all about the Dragon Reborn and keeping them safe. You'd think that would be the focus of the narrative, but both the show and the book kind of keep forgetting that is like the main like agenda for Moiraine. Like Moiraine completely, like she seems to completely forget her agenda in the show. But up to this point in the book, at least she's been on that. But now she's like, I gotta take all of you, even though it's a really deadly place. We're gonna go protect this like battery of magic energy. And this all just gets dumped in this chapter along with fast travel. So it's just like, I don't know. It was just like a lot of explanations, and it kind of dragged a little bit. Like it's creative and everything, but it's like, I don't want a whole chapter of like exposition.
Well, and I think this is kind of going into that, like, we don't really know what Moiraine is doing or what she wants. Because you saying that also reminds me. So like, okay, she said like, oh, to Perrin, like, you think dying would keep you from the Dark One. But how many times did she fucking threaten them in the first beginning chapters when they were together, where she was like, basically, if I can't have you, no one can, is kind of the vibe that we got from her. I was like, so, but you just said that he could potentially get them if they're dead. So you would have given them to him? But she
only just realized that on the basis of him being able to enter their dreams. She says that in the context of she's like, what the hell? He has gotten that far out of his prison and nobody told me, nobody informed me. This is really bad. Okay. Plans have to change now, she sort of says here.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I did write down, completely forgot she didn't know about their dreams for this chapter, because it's just that like first thing they talk about in the book or in the show. What are dreamwalkers? They're not in the glossary thing in the back of the book.
Yeah, I don't think they really gave an explanation. I didn't look for them in the glossary, but I assume it's just like either Aes Sedai or a channeling ability to kind of just get into people's dreams or communicate through dreams. So
I thought maybe to like hunt the bad people. Is that kind of what you assumed? Like that someone that could get into dreams and hunt the bad people? Is that maybe what it is?
Good or bad, I think it's just the ability potentially. I mean, Caleb might know more about this, but I thought it was just an ability to tap into people's dreams because she mentions being able to do it, but then she seems to think that like Shaitan is also a dreamwalker or showing similar abilities. So I don't know if it's like a specific label for like a good person who's entering dreams or like it's just a label for somebody who can enter dreams.
Yeah, this is one of those cases where I don't think we've had any indication. And like you say, it's not even in the glossary. So this is, I think, a seeding of a plot thread for the next book that I probably shouldn't spoil in any way because I could tell you about Dreamwalkers.
Okay.
I probably shouldn't tell you about Dreamwalkers. Katie, you wanted to talk more about the ways. Do you want to sum up for us chapter 43, Decisions and Apparitions, where Loial explains why he really does not want... He says at the end of chapter 42, if we enter the ways, we will all die or be swallowed by the shadow.
Yes, I liked this, or I found it funny, the turn in Loial's character here, because he was so excited to go on this trip, and he was like, nothing can stop me from going on this journey with you. I don't care how dangerous it is. And then Moiraine's like, okay, we're going to travel through the ways. And he was like, never mind. I'm totally out, guys. So yeah, I thought that was a funny little turn in his character. But in chapter 43, Loial kind of gets into why the ways are no longer safe. But Moiraine pushes back and thinks the world is in danger to a degree that it doesn't matter. They basically have to try any path afforded to them to get where they need to go. And also in this chapter, Rand wakes from another dream of Baalzamon. And this time he is bleeding from a little a splinter wound that he received during the dream, which is just another like real world manifestation of these dreams to kind of let us know how serious they are.
And this time, I think it's meant to be a small but critical detail that the splinter comes out of the dream. Maybe is that the implication? Because it then disappears, like vanishes, like you think from the wound, which I think that's the first time anything like that has happened. Like a bad thing happens in the dream, and they usually wake with like an equivalent wound. But correct, I don't know. Am I right about that? Is that the first time we've gotten this detail of matter transfer?
Yeah, he's been injured before from the dream.
Yeah,
I remember that. I think it was the one where he ended up in the maze. He's been injured, but nothing has come through. So like Freddy's getting closer to hurting you in your dream. But what I wrote down, I'm very confused. What happened to the first 30 or so chapters of saying that you can't say the Dark One's name, and now every 3 seconds
they don't. They use his euphemisms and alternative names. I don't think anybody says Shaitan aloud here. Right.
Oh, is that like his official name?
Yes, that's the one you're not supposed to. But it still is like not good to say the other ones. But it's like saying he we must not speak of when you say the Dark One or Baalzamon or something like that. Yeah.
Baalzamon. Okay. Isn't that like a fatal flaw of all bad guys that they don't copyright all their nicknames so that it's also upsetting or like powerful? So
we do get the history of how the ways were created and why they have gotten corrupted, which is that it was, and I thought this was, I know this is so expository, these chapters, but I was just enjoying it. I really like all this world building. I really enjoyed the sort of like little microfiction about the men who could channel after Sheol Ghul, after the breaking of, or at the beginning of the breaking of the world. So they sealed away the Dark One. In the final battle, the Sayadine, the male half, gets tainted, and a whole bunch of the men who were there, the male Aes Sedai, go immediately mad and start destroying everything. But a bunch of them, they're not as quickly affected, and they run away to the steadings where the Ogier are, where they can be cut off from the One Power and survive longer. And that also stops the Dark One's taint from infecting them and corrupting them as soon. But eventually they can't stay there because it's sort of like it's not quite as bad as being gentled, but it's like being slowly gentled. You're cut off that long, you start to die. Your soul starts to die in some way. So they have to leave, but before they do, they leave a thank you gift for all the Ogier way back when, where they built this ways network for them of the way gates across the world between all the steadings. Outside every steading, there's a way gate, which can be used to travel. And then at some point, hundreds and hundreds of years later, the ways went from this beautiful winding garden paradise of like the sunny like world between worlds to slowly being corrupted by the corruption that was on Sayidine itself, on the male half of the One Power. And now they are just awful. Like they are fully are falling to pieces, just totally corrupted by Makin Shin, I think it is. It's not in front of me, but I think that's the name of the Black Wind that seems to be this, well, we'll learn, possibly sentient, sapient, parasitic being that has grown in the ways out of the corruption on the One Power. So a lot more we're learning here. And that way gates are all but impossible to destroy, and that there's still one at Faldara. That's some of the information we get here. And that the Dark One is on the brink of victory.
Right. And they talk about the dreams, though, and they make a comment about how, like, or I guess Balsamon makes the comment about how, like, I've played this out with you, like, 100 fucking times, and you do different things. But they don't mention Perrin, if Perrin had the dream here. I think they only say that Matt and
No, he does.
Did.
No, Perrin says as well here. I'm
he?
pretty sure. I thought it. Let me see if I could find the spot where it goes on, where they both say they had the same one. You always do. They wake up. Matt's there. Had the same thing.
I think they do. I don't remember. I feel like they mentioned it like a little later when they're meeting up, because Matt and Rand are sleeping together in the same room, but Perrin I think is elsewhere.
Okay.
I feel like it. Maybe I'm just assuming that from all the prior times. But yeah, like you said, like the dance that Balsamon's doing, it almost reminds me, maybe it's because the Matrix is on my mind so much with the new one coming out like next week, of the end of Matrix Reloaded, where it's revealed to Neo by the architect that we have done this countless times, over and over, every eventuality, always different. Oh, you say these, he's like showing all the different faces of Neo and all these different times that he has tried to do or say something different and tried to resist, but the end result is always the same, and he always winds up having to die at the end, and they've just reset the Matrix over and over.
Yeah, no, I was going back to see if Perrin does say anything, because that whole section then is just Matt telling Moiraine that the Balsamon knows who he is.
I might just be assuming that he did, because all the other times we had it confirmed.
I thought it was only when he was out in like the wilderness with the wolves that he wasn't having those dreams. But that's why I didn't know, like, okay, now that he's like has yellow eyes, is he like part wolf now? So he's not having dreams, or did they just not include him in that? Did I miss it? I wasn't.
And his symbol in the dreams is a wolf now, right? Like the Balsamon now knows what they look like, kind of. He's got like these little clay figures that one is a wolf, one has a dagger, and one has a sword for each of the three of them, and they sort of vaguely look like the three guys. Not Egwene or Nynaeve, though, because we're told here, they might be Ta'Veren too. I don't know, maybe, but they're not the three on the Dark One's radar.
Both of the points you guys just mentioned are kind of like frustrations for me, because it's like in the book, I don't know if this is going to be revealed later that they are, and they're just kind of holding off on that, but it really feels like the book's just focusing on these three dudes, whereas in the show, from the start, they're like, yeah, these five young adults could be, like, one of them could be the chosen one. And it's interesting because when I was watching episode, I think 4 with Josh, and Nynaeve has like that whole blow up ability with her powers. Josh actually thought, like, he's like, okay, so she's like the chosen one then, and they put such a stronger emphasis on that, whereas in the books they're like, you two women might be like later, but you're not as important, you can go channel like and be Aes Sedai, but like you guys aren't the chosen one. The chosen one has to be one of these dudes. Like, it has to be a guy, of course, because it's fantasy and only bros like read fantasy in the 90s, but like, I don't know, it felt very kind of centered on the men, whereas in the show they're giving equal agency to all of them in terms of, or equal importance in the speculation of who's like the Dragon Reborn. But like, I really didn't like that part in like these chapters where they're just like talking about how is it pronounced, Ta'Veren? Like
I've always said Ta'Veren, but I think they're saying Ta'Veren on the show, maybe, so far.
Yeah, I had to go to the glossary to like look up exactly what that meant again. It's like having the pattern revolve around you as an individual. So it's a little narcissistic, but it's like, you get like everything kind of centers around you, but then the women don't even get that. Like I didn't, pulls you into it. And I just like how I didn't like how they just glossed over that with them. They're like, like, as of now, we don't think you're Ta'Veren, but like, you're powerful and you could have influence here and agenda. And it seems like the pattern wants you here, but we still think it's one of these guys. So that, and then Perrin and the wolves, like, and like the protection they give and that cool kind of protecting his dreams, to your point, Keely, about like how they've been like kind of his like guardian. I don't like that they completely removed that from the show, because like they use the wolves as like Saitan, like they're trying to make the wolves all scary and everything, and not even giving them personality and names and everything, and they use the wolves as like eating his wife in the dream sequence. And, like, this is totally off. The wolves are protecting his dream, and they got rid of that completely.
That was confusing, but I think that was Baal-Zaman making that the dream, like showing the wolves.
He was, but that's like opposite of like the wolves were, correct me if I'm wrong, but like a bunch of chapters earlier when that was happening in the books, the wolves were protecting him, kind of guarding the dreams, and he wasn't having like any of that. But then like in the show, they keep making the wolves like, I don't know, I haven't liked that at all in the show, that like the wolves are such a cool fantasy aspect. He's talking to them, they have names. You feel sad when the baby one dies, like sacrificing himself to kill the White Cloak. That kind of sets off that whole like Hopper. It's like they completely got rid of that, and now the wolves are just kind of there, and they're speculating about it.
Because we haven't met Elias, right? Who's going to explain all this, or who's going to now I'm kind of giving up on Elias even showing up in the series.
He might not. I think he's going to be like those Harry Potter characters that you were like waiting for in the movies, and there's like, nope, that whole arc's gone. Like just cutting out fan favorites for the sake of like kind of expediting timelines and like plot points. But I don't think he's showing up, and he's such a good book character that that's probably like one of the biggest losses of the show right now.
Well, and so I'm wondering, like, I'm kind of afraid, because of how fast the show is moving, that the fact that they're making Egwene and Nynaeve such big characters is pulling stuff from later books that we wouldn't get to. So, you know, from the book's perspective right now, Loial is like, oh, okay, so there's not just one Tavarine, there's three, totally ignoring Egwene and Nynaeve. So I even wrote down, like, is that like a male thing? Like, does that not happen for women?
No, it's definitely not a male thing.
Okay,
thing.
No. Well, I mean, even in this, like, I think you're totally right about the pooling stuff from the Great Hunt back into it here.
But I'm just kind of afraid that, like, you know, we're getting spoiled on potentially giant things just because the show is moving so friggin' fast.
It's getting me nervous. Like, I didn't even want to watch last episode because, I mean, they went with a whole different, like, almost filler plot thread of like this warder committing suicide. Steppen committing suicide and all that. But I was honestly worried to watch this because I hadn't read up to 46 yet, and I was like, are they going to spoil big things in this episode, because they keep moving so exponentially faster than we're reading. So I'm glad there's going to be a break, because if the show ends soon, then we're not hopefully getting too many more spoilers than if we start book 2.
God, I had a thread from something you just said, Keely, that is now yes, on the dismissing them as possible dragon candidates or Ta'veren candidates. I think both the book and, like, early on we get like Moiraine's dismissal, which the show does raise, is like, oh no, Egwene's too young. She is 17 in the book. She's not 19. She wasn't born the right number of years ago, and Nynaeve is too old. She was also not born the right number of years ago. And the show raises that early, and then has in episode 4, Moiraine is suddenly doubting that because of everything happening, because Logain is way too old. He's like older than any of them. And she's like, maybe this was off. And then everything happens with Nynaeve. And also in the show, they have changed it. So Egwene is exactly the same age as the 3 boys. So they have definitely like shifted up the timeline in some ways to alter the reasons that Moiraine either doesn't dismiss Egwene in the show or does dismiss Nynaeve early on, kind of thing. Whereas, you know, in the book, it's almost more like, well, we don't even know what Moraine's reasons are at all early on, other than she's interested in young men of a certain age. And that seems to be what the Fades are. The Fades are only looking at people around town. They're also only looking for that age cohort, the 19-year-olds in the book, and 20 or are they 20 or 21 in the show? 20-year-olds in the show, I guess. All along in there. So yeah, I guess the last 2 chapters here, things are happening in the ways, and they're happening quickly. Katie, do you want to sum us up chapter 24, The Dark Along the Ways? And then actually, Dan, if you want to just go right into summarizing chapter 45, What Falls in Shadow, right after, because I think we'll just talk about them together. Makes the most sense.
Sure. 44, we've got Loial leads Moiraine's party to the Waygate, which is hidden in a cellar. They step through into darkness and travel along winding ramps and crumbling bridges in a fairly terrifying space.
And then with 45, they're traveling along in the Waygate, and they encounter a broken bridge, which forces Moiraine's party to backtrack. They camp and kind of have dinner and kind of sleep there the night, and then Lan believes that someone is following them. So Moiraine, in addition to Lan, everyone's on edge a little bit. They're not sure who's following them, whether they're good or bad. Moiraine finds proof that trollocs have been using the ways, which is a big revelation, and that's where we kind of get into the details that we talked about a little earlier on this episode, where the trollocs are using it. It's a light bulb moment where it puts together a lot of the pieces from earlier, and then they're almost to their destination. Rand hears the sound of a ghostly wind called, and Caleb, correct me on this one, because it was Machin Shin, which eats people's souls. The Waygate is locked. It causes a lot of tension. Moiraine kind of uses her staff to kind of blowtorch through the gate, and they kind of push through and escape.
Okay. A quick note on the last ones I forgot to bring up, but is relevant here as they're running into it. Did anybody else feel this tension between the stakes are suddenly so high and Moiraine is like, oh my God, the end of the world is nigh. We need to rush through the most dangerous way possible to get to Faldara and the Eye of the World up above it. Everything has to wait. We can't go to Tarvalin. We can't help Matt. Like, this is the possible end of the world here. However, no matter how high these stakes are, I guess the divisions in the tower are so deep that Moiraine doesn't even raise the possibility of trying to convince the 20-something Red Aja in Caemlyn right now to help out, like, Red Aja, who also want to stop the Dark One from ending the world. There's like a literal small army of the most powerful women on the planet here, and it's not even raised the possibility of bringing them along. What did I miss an excuse given beyond just, we can't trust them? Is this really just highlighting that's how bad things are in the tower now, that the blue do not trust the red at all, or Moiraine doesn't specifically?
My understanding of that, and I don't think the book gives a clear explanation of that, but she's been off on this, like, at least in the show, it's 2 years. I forget in the book what they mentioned, how long it's been while she's searching around for the Dragon Reborn, but it sounds almost like putting in work requests where it could be, there's so much bureaucratic nonsense that she'd have to explain all this stuff. They'd want answers. They'd go back and forth making a decision. And it sounds like she's trying to skip over the bureaucracy of the decision making and explaining how she knows all this information, why they need to get there, having them maybe need to meet as a council and make a decision, and all the politics there. And she's like, we're just going to expedite this and go ourselves. I'm going to take you all there, and like Lan and I are just going to make this trip because we don't have time to negotiate it with like the Red Aja. So that was my thinking, and it sort of made sense in my head. I didn't really need to question why she didn't want to recruit them, because it's like,
that's probably
there's so much politics. Yeah, if there's so much politics with all them, trying to get them on board and decide upon that would have taken days, which she says they don't have the time to do.
Yeah, it was that, and then also that I think they haven't said in a while, but that I think there's this fear that the Red Aja would get caught up on the fact that there's these dudes traveling with her that could potentially channel or something. Like, there might be something important about these men, and we know the Red Aja, at least from the show, try to kill all the men. So it might be more dangerous to bring them along. Yeah. They'd be going through the Waygate and accidentally, Sparta kick Rand off the edge or something.
I wouldn't mind that in the book.
I do feel like it's interesting how there's such a big contrast between the show and the book in like the regard we've been talking about with the politics of the Aes Sedai. Whereas like in the book, you kind of feel like they're out on their own. Like they're not turning to anyone else for help. It's just like, oh, the world might be coming to an end, and it's just this one Aes Sedai and her warder and a couple kids trying to fight it. Whereas in the show, you get a much like larger sense of the community and the politics.
Aww. Yeah, we're kind of missing, sorry, Fellowship again. We're missing the Council of Saruman moment, right? Where Gandalf is like, wow, this is all really huge. I've been off on my own for however many years. I should go check in with the Wizard Tower and see what Saruman the Wise has to say about all this, or maybe Radagast or somebody, and then goes and then finds out, whoops, this was a big mistake. Turns out the politics got a lot worse here than I realized the last time I left Orthanc, and now Saruman works for Sauron. But we don't ever have, maybe because Moiraine is more of a side character in this than well, no, I guess Gandalf doesn't have perspective chapters in Fellowship either. We find out things from him when he's here. So it feels like we're missing that sequence as we get into the Gandalf leading them into Moria thing. And I guess this is just a small thing that the show has left out, right? That Moiraine uses her staff for everything in the book, and that is kind of like her focus, and it's like such an important part of using the power for her. She even like breaks the lock to get. She doesn't want to damage the lock, so she taps it with her staff and it falls open neatly, I guess, to get into the ways.
It's way too Gandalf.
Yeah.
I feel like having a staff and going through like a Mines of Moria situation and have like a Balrog thing come up on them was just like, okay, the imagery was way too close to home to like actually have them use like staffs, because it's already like a Lord of the Rings ripoff. So,
well, you know what it did accomplish by being so much of a Fellowship homage the whole time, and this whole book following so much. I did not remember the details of the end of the book enough to not be on pins and needles. Like, is Moiraine going to die here in the ways? Is she going to stay? It even sets it up that I thought here she was going to stay behind and like hold the door, Bridge of Khazad Doom style, literally the crumbling bridge here, like suspended above nothing, thousands of feet, maybe more, infinitely deep down into darkness as they all go through the door. But no, she makes it in time. She comes out the other side at the end with her blowtorch, like you said, Dan, after she's gotten through everybody. She does to say she's like shooting these fireworks of attacks, like liquid, molten, yellow and white and red flames out in a long beam that's filled with black flecks, because the one power, even when she touches Sayadar here, is tainted by the corruption of Makin Shin and of the ways at this point. It's a creepy place. I thought these were really effective descriptions, like a really haunting, beautiful, not, it reminds me of Moria, but it's a totally different kind of thing here. Like these endlessly looping, impossible kind of, wow, I'm blanking on the artist who famously did all those, impossible staircases, landscapes and everything. Y'all know who I mean. Escher, right? It's like MC Escher paintings of in the dark, suspended above nothing as they travel through the ways here. And as Loial is just terrified more and more by everything they're encountering and how much this place is kind of rotting. And there's like holes appearing and everything, and bridges are falling apart and ways are lost. Like it turns out the way to Tar Valon is gone, fallen to pieces. They encounter like a really grisly scene of all these trollocs who is like, they are kind of melted into the stones. It's almost like the place sort of swallowed them alive, and they're all dead in this frozen, twisting, horrible way where they're almost eaten by the stonework of the ways here. A lot of those character beats that we've expressed annoyance with between the teenagers being like, oh, you talk to another woman, and then Perrin being like, oh, well, Egwene, what about Aram at the dance? What about that handsome dude that you were getting real close with? I felt like I was sort of, like you said, Dan, skimming over those sections as quickly as I could. Seems sort of, neither here nor there for the place that they are right now. Any standout passages? I have so much highlight in all these.
Not so much a passage, but the previous chapter and then this one. Isn't this the first time she lets them know that she's blue?
Oh, it might be. I might have totally forgotten because the show has had that established for so long now.
Because like it's when Loial is talking about the male Aes Sedai that made the way gates, and he's scared of Moiraine a little bit because the red Aja thought that by letting the men into the steading that they were like prolonging the issue or the breaking, but the blue do not think that. And then she's like, "Don't worry, bro, I'm blue." And then in this chapter, she says something about we have to get to Shariam or Shariam Sedai, which is another blue Aja in Tar Valon, I think, is where they said he was. So it's like, this is now twice that they're bringing up blue for the first time.
Well, did they? You might be right. I don't remember. Like when there was that really early chapter where she gave Egwene the rundown of the different colors.
Did
she was first teaching her how to channel. Yeah, they gave her a rundown and she had the orb and she's like looking into the orb, and they have that scene in the show, but I'm trying to remember.
I think it's the show that adds the Aja to that, because there is the scene with the stone in the book. I don't think she mentioned the Aja colors. I could maybe that's right, but for some reason I thought that was a show addition to that scene.
I could have sworn it was, or Katie and I looked in the glossary and found out about like the red and everything.
Oh, okay.
She mentions Aja, but I don't remember if it was like specifically described. I remember we talked about it back then before we had seen the show.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought that was from the glossary. But yeah, at this point, like you said, there's so many things blending together. So the first mention of an Aja in the book is, for me, page 501, which is chapter 12, Across the Terran. So red Aja, red Aja, red Aja. And if she is Aes Sedai, of what Aja? Yeah, I don't think so. Unless it's just not coming up in my search. We learned what the Red Aja are about in chapter 12. I think they're the only one we ever got any kind of. I remember talking about in the book early on. They were the only one we got any kind of description of what they did. And they're holding their duty to be the prevention of another breaking of the world, which they do by hunting down every man who ever dreamed of wielding the one power. This is all the Tom conversation. I'm pretty sure that was the first mention, but I don't know. Again, it's all getting so tangled now. Invisible climb, curve of the ramp. I love how the end of chapter 44 is the ways were almost boring. So much nothing happened, which I thought was a fun. I didn't know if that was like Jordan having a little fun of acknowledgement there. Although I didn't find 44 boring personally, just because I was really into the engrossing horror of the design of this place and the wonder of it at the same time. It felt like one of the more, at that point in my life, at least I hadn't read a ton of fantasy. So it seemed like a pretty unique location and a unique way of doing this between the worlds. Although now I kind of, I'm at the point where, it's a trope. It's the staircases between the worlds or the bridges between the worlds that I'm sure is much, much, much older than the Wheel of Time.
Yeah, it was almost like that movie moment where he's like, things can't get any worse, or it's like, oh, it's not that bad. And then as soon as he says that, it's like, oh, well, the bridge is out. But there was one, let me see if I can find it. I put referencing those notes of like Rand being a dumbass. It was just like cringy dialogue when he's talking to the Ogier and Loial is just like all kind of hesitant about it, and like Rand's like, yeah, we'll go on an adventure to these places you wanted to go to, and he's like, do you actually think this will ever end? And then Rand, being the dumbass that he is like, oh yeah, you believe it will ever be over, Rand? And he frowned at the Ogier. You said it will only take 2 days to reach Faldora. It's like, are you a fucking dumbass? Like, he's talking about just like the entire thing. It's like dialogue like that is just so cringy, because I'm like, these are children and they're really clueless as to like any kind of like subtle drops of like, I don't know, they just constantly are clueless about like the danger they're in or the stakes or whatever, whereas in the show it all weighs on them a lot more and they seem cognizant of that and you can kind of relate to them more. But here they're just like stupid kids that even in this like dark traveling world, they're still getting uptight about like teenage angst about like he talked to a girl, and they're all just like kind of making jabs about that. I'm like, is this really the dialogue we're going to have like near the world's end? Like, oh, you talked to a girl, you talked to a boy, and like they spend like 2 paragraphs and then they're like having tea, but only 1 tea. And just like all this is like really strange dialogue to be having like when you're in such a hurry. Like, I don't know. It kind of like these moments kind of slow Jordan's world down from being like faster paced. Like I wouldn't really be thinking about like tea and kind of camping. Like they constantly are having these like in moments, and then the other moments are like the camping around a fireplace and eating bread and cheese and also having their tea in the morning.
Which again,
it's just
yeah. I was gonna say again, it's because Tolkien does it, but the hobbits are so much less annoying than these teenagers, and they're like really endearing, and they don't have any. Well, I mean, they occasionally rib Sam about Rosie, but at this point, on like waiting outside to get into Moria while Gandalf is working on on trying his own torch welding to get in, it's like maybe I don't know if it's that scene, but it's probably like if it's romance dialogue, it's about Aragorn and Arwen and their star-crossed love, and like the 100 years or whatever that they've been together, and the possibility of giving everything up at all. I don't know. It's a lot more compelling probably than this high school drama we're getting here between these on these stops. Which thank God there are adults there. And Loial.
I was also similarly feeling the same way as Dan, also because they haven't been together in so long, and then they come together and their conversation seems so trivial. I'm like, were there any depths to your relationships at all? Like, they're said to be like so close, but are they close only because they're from the same place? Or I don't know.
That's something Rand asked in earlier chapter. It's either Rand or Matt who was thinking at one point, yeah, would we even be, like, are these people even my friends? Would we even be friends if we didn't just happen to be the same age growing up in the same town? Which is, that's a real vibe when you're from a really small place. Yeah, it's to hang a whole book on it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's compelling, and there really could be an interesting dynamic there where they realize they're just friends because of location, which a lot of people, you can tell an interesting story there because readers could relate to that, because so many people have like middle school and high school friends that they no longer talk to like 20 years from then, and they're like no longer friends, but they had such a deep connection to these people during their rearing and like kind of like just aging, like growing up and all that. So it's like, that's an interesting, I just didn't even pick up on that at all. So it's like they just have like trivial conversations. Jordan doesn't seem to know how to write like teenage interactions at all. Even adults, he realized both the book and the TV show have a crutch, which is, and the show, I've picked up on this a lot too, that, and the screenwriting really could improve here, is that they'll go on long monologues and it's like one character talking for like 2 to 5 minutes of the show and people just listening to that. And there's not a lot of back and forth conversation. And when you go from watching that to Succession, where everything is about quick jabs and like kind of the fun humor and kind of the character dynamics, Wheel of Time is seriously scarce on having that both in book and in TV show. It's like, you gotta write better kind of like dynamics between these characters and fun jabs or fun conversations, because if you're gonna rely on like, he talked to a girl and go back and forth on that for like a paragraph or two, like that's very thin in terms of like actually creating compelling character development. So like, I don't know, like Moiraine's interesting, but even the show does a better job with that. So I don't know, like Jordan, I like his writing style, but he's really not convincing me with this character so far, though they're all pretty shallow.
Well, and you can't have a fantasy if you don't have them eating like bread and cheese. So he has to throw that as often as possible. But also, like, okay, every single fucking person now has said that Perrin is like so great with women. Prove it. Do something, because they're constantly saying he's good with women. In what way? Because no one is saying anything. So at this point, it's like, okay, you beat me over the head with that. Well, prove it. Because they said in the group chat, I was like, I think Layla has something to say about that, about him being good with women. You know, they didn't have him murder his wife in the fucking books, but at least that's something. Like, give them some kind of character.
I always thought that was a joke. I thought that was like a joke where every one of these characters thinks that the other is good with women, and Perrin thinks that Matt and Rand are, but none of them actually are. But it also stopped being funny a long time ago. And it needs to be replaced with something, right, beyond this gag for these conversations. So you can see, like we talked about, the show straining to offer new things. And I think it's been, I don't know, I think for all our complaints about episode 5, I feel like, and what you're talking about, Dan, that the dialogue is not particularly naturalistic. It's a lot, and a lot of TV shows that do, and Game of Thrones often did, that one character talking for an inordinately long period of time.
It's not natural at all.
But I think those are two different styles of writing, and it doesn't necessarily have to be naturalistic. There's a very big difference between like a quick-witted comedy that's quip-based and, something that has as much lore and as much information to get through density-wise as Wheel of Time does. But I do think the show has done a better job on the whole of really fleshing out the Two Rivers teens, 20-year-olds in the show more than anything.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like some of that is the actors too, but they have felt way less annoying and way just more endearing in general. And that reunion gets so much more out of being, like, I like this reunion a lot here until these conversations start again. But I thought that was maybe the strongest thing for me in episode 5 last week, was seeing them back together again, and Nynaeve's relationship. Because Nynaeve she doesn't get much to do here either, right? She's just sort of like grumbling about Moiraine in the background. And now she's just along for the ride here. They all kind of are being propelled into Mak and Shin's and the ways, because there's such a large group here.
I think they're coming across better in the show because they did get rid of all this bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if they were experiencing this stuff in the show, not talking to each other about the fucking dreams, about, anything that's happening, and then also being like jealous dicks through all of this, it's like, y'all are gonna fucking die. Stop worrying about it. It's like, that might be the last fucking person he talks to, and you're gonna give him grief over, like, fuck off.
Yeah, it's a very immature way of like just I don't know. I know they're teenagers, but still, even for teenagers, it's incredibly kind of like middle school, like elementary of them to just kind of be viewing interactions with women that way. But they almost seem that sheltered. So like maybe if they can actually take the first book, because it's very like sheltered child kind of way of engaging like somebody of the opposite sex. And so it's like, I'm wondering if like the next few books, Jordan's actually going to really flesh them out, and as they get to become adults. Like, the only kind of character development and growth I noticed in the book so far was when Rand noticed that things that would have really bothered them, they were just kind of accepting. I think it was going down in the cellar, which was like 42 or 40.
We're just breaking and entering into this random house using.
Yeah, he's power. Like, this would have. He's like, we would have, and Rand is thinking to himself that they would have whined and complained about this, but they're all just kind of going into it because they're like, we're taking this part for the course. So it's like, oh, look, a little character development. Rand's not bitching about everything when he's told to do something by like Moiraine. They're actually, it was kind of nice. They don't have these pump the brakes. Nynaeve or Rand is going to complain about something, and then we're going to do it anyway. It's like, okay, they're just getting along and doing it. So that was a nice little bit of like sprinkling some like character development for Rand. He's becoming a little more mature, but he still is super immature with any conversation around women. And Egwene is just like such a terrible arc in the book versus the show where they actually have a relationship already, and he's worried about her, and seeing her again and everything was just a lot more realistic, or I don't know, easier to digest.
Well, maybe some hope on the horizon. Speaking of the next book, where looking at the stats, The Great Hunt is only 40% of its chapters are from Rand's perspective in that one, and that percentage will plummet down to almost nothing in the third book. So however we still feel about Rand by then, and I don't know if we'll be doing some catch up where the characters are like doing their show development in book 2 more than they were here. Probably the biggest complaint we've had consistently over Eye of the World. Next time, though, we'll be finishing it. We'll be reading chapters 46 to 53. Believe it or not, there are only 8 chapters left in the book. And since the last 3 chapters are really short, we just decided to go right ahead. So we will finish The Eye of the World and watch episode 6 of the TV show at some point, which will also be covered around next week. And there's only 3 episodes of the TV season. So I don't know about y'all. I'm excited to see if and whether we stick the landing. I think I'm most excited to see if the show sticks the landing, and if we see, for instance, if they tile these threads up nicely, if the budget comes back into things. But I'm also curious if we'll end on a more positive note for Eye of the World as we really get into some of the most intense chapters plot-wise. We'll find out. So see y'all then. This episode of WOTCast was produced by yours truly. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Caleb Wimble. Katie, where can people find you on the internet? Sorry, I caught you at a bad moment.
You can find me at katiejarvis.com or on Instagram at 30inLA, and you may have heard some baby sky noises through this episode.
Serenading us all delightfully. Dan, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at PansyDan.
And Keely, what about you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Keely_reads.
Remember, you can find us all at WOTCast.net. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at WOTCast Podcast. Thank you all for the support on there and the comments that you've been giving over the last couple of weeks. And, something that I could notice very distinctly on the back end of things, and that helps enormously, is that every time someone shares one of our social media posts, that is almost an instantaneous jump in the number of downloads that day. Sometimes that means just one post, even if you don't think that many of your friends are reading it, for us can very easily mean as an additional 15 to 30 listeners just from a single post. So whether or not you support us on Patreon, it helps a lot if you just share an episode on social media, or even you don't even have to say anything, or if you want, you can tell people what you like about the show. You can leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. It's the number 2 way we find new listeners, after the number 1 way of, like I just said, telling friends about the show. That word of mouth really means the word to us. That's all for today. Thank you so much for listening, folks. And remember, this is not the ending. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but this is an ending. Farewell.